So I'm going to introduce you. This is Gidigaa Migizi, Doug Williams from the Mashkinonzheh, or the Pike Clan of the Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg Nation. Doug is from Curve Lake First Nation. He's a pipe carrier, a sweat lodge holder, ceremonial leader, a past chief, a hunter, a fisher, a trapper, a ricer, a sugar wisher. He's a knowledge holder. He is fluent in the language. He's also an associate prof and director of studies at Trent University in Indigenous Studies, and teaches the land-based course for the PhD program. And he is the author of Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg. This is our territory that was published by ARP Books in 2018. And so I wanted to say Chimigwech for spending some time with us on Zoom today, Doug. And I wanted to start talking about how Mississauga and Nishnaabeg have experienced epidemics in the past, because this is not our first time faced with a disease that is very damaging to our health and to our communities. It's something that diseases came as part of colonialism and colonization. And so can you just start by talking about how our ancestors dealt with epidemics and dealt with sickness, and what our history is with epidemics?
Okay, well, first of all, bonjour, Bonin. Greetings from us here in this part of Ontario. Yes, I am a Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg. At this point in time, we're living on the Trent River Valley, which is one of the rivers that flows into Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario, the northern shores being our traditional territory. We're now situated on 5 First Nations, and Curve Lake itself is on the upper Trent River. On the same river system as Peterborough, Ontario, if you were to look for it on the map. We're just north of Peterborough. Below Peterborough is another First Nation called Hiawatha, which is on where the Trent River flows into Rice Lake. And it also continues beyond Rice Lake and through that part of Ontario, and then flows into Lake Ontario. This is our territory, and we've lived here a long time, for thousands of years, actually. So it honors me that you've asked me to speak to you. I did write that book. I touch upon our history. I touch upon the history of pandemics in the area. Not fully, but this current great sickness we're facing is, it leaves me with having to think about what would have happened to our people at the time that the great sicknesses from the past have come upon us. And our people talk about that. I've spent a lot of time with our old people years ago. I was raised by them, and I appreciate that so much. I didn't know at the time that it was going to be so important to our younger ones for me to be the conduit, to lack of a better term, to be able to further transfer their knowledge to our younger generation. But anyway, the pandemics of the past were introduced by the Europeans who came here to this area in the 1600s. Samuel Champlain was the first European to show up here in our territory. But at the same time, we had been living here kind of with the Huron-Wendat, who asked to come to our territory years before that to grow corn. This is a good area that can grow good crops of that nature, right? The tobacco is another one that they grew. And there's several other nations that came with them to come here, and with our permission, of course, that they came to Ontario and they grew corn, they grew tobacco, and there's really good soil here for that. And today you could find the agriculturalists kind of going to those places and growing good crops, like the Niagara fruit belt, as an example, is a good one. And all the area around Lake Simcoe was good for soil for corn. And so anyway, that was what was going on when Champlain came. He was very much attracted, of course, to the Huron-Wendat and their lifestyle, because they were agricultural people. They lived in longhouses. They were sedentary, to use their term, and so they were very much understood. That's a quote by them, by the European. We are probably not so attractive to the Europeans because we're highly mobile, we're non-agricultural, but yet we lived in an area of agriculturalism, if you want to use that word, and we were lived, sort of in a symbiotic relationship, for the lack of a better term for it, is that in other words, we live side by side together, different styles, but we survived very well for a long time. Okay, in came the European with its viruses. Right? They introduced viruses to us, and this is what's happening today, is that, we're going through a viral time. It's, our people call it the Great Sickness and the Great Sicknesses. The first wave hit almost immediately. And those diseases were diseases that were, the Europeans were quite immune to them, right, by this time, because historically they had to deal with them themselves, but they were immune to it. We were not. We're not immune to cholera, as an example, diphtheria, smallpox, those kind of diseases. Some of them bacterial in nature, some viruses. Now, our people talk about these things, right? And we know now, in looking back, archaeologists tell us, historians tell us that in our stories tell us that the Huron-Wendat really suffered greatly, along with the other nations like the Petun, where the tobacco growers, and the neutral people were the ones who were around the Niagara fruit belt region, and they really got hit hard because I think what happened, if you compare it with the current situation, is that the longhouses acted as incubators for this viral diseases that hit. So a lot of them succumbed to that. We got sick also, and we were mobile, so we weren't hit so much. Now, what that tells us is that if you're living out away from these things, your chances of survival are better. So that still applies today. if you're in a very close situation, if you're in a very close contact situation, in an incubated situation, you're going to get sick with this virus. If you're out in the open land, if you're up in the open air, and if you not so much contact with people, unless we had to live like that in the old days because of survival on other things, and we had to separate. We didn't live in villages as much as, say, the Haudenosaunee Iroquois people did. They got hit hard. And we didn't. We survived because we had to leave the area too, because we could, I think our people could see by the death occurring not to go near people. Because naturally you're going to say, well, gee, that family is sick. I'm not going to go and see them today, sort of thing. And that very natural process will keep you away from being sick. They knew that. They knew that because there's a story that's told by our old people that the Jesuits, okay, and with due respect of what they were meaning to do, carried viruses. They knew that, so they kept away from missionaries. The Haudenosaunee were visited by these people. It wasn't too long before the Iroquois people figured out that it was the missionaries who were bringing some of these viruses. So they, as one story told, where a priest, Jesuit priest, had come to a Haudenosaunee village on the St. Lawrence. He went to visit the further on down towards Lake Champlain. And then he left to come to our area, right? The word spread from there to us, this guy is coming, and they figured out that he left some provisions down there for him to return to. In other words, he left bags of things, and people were getting connected that if you did anything with these, you get diseased. In other words, you get a virus. They figured that out. So anyway, they said, it's him that's doing this. It's him that's carrying this virus. Of course, they called it different at those times. They called it a sort of well, how would I say it? Ikjiaksuin is the word. That means that he's carrying a great sickness that we don't know about, right? So they figured out it was him. So they waited for him. If he comes back with those provisions in those bags that he left behind, we're going to have to get rid of him. We can't afford to have people die. So that's what happened. He came back, and they got rid of him. I mean, they had to.
This was Father
Unfortunate. Job. Father Job was his.
He's famous.
He's been made a saint. He's Saint Job, right? But that tells a bit of a side of our story, in that it spread through our territory. Of you got to be careful of these sicknesses, right? Yeah. So we left our area temporarily just to get away. We moved north of here for what I figure maybe 10 to 20 years. When our people came back, these again are stories that they were told to me. When our people came back, they found a lot of people that of skeletal remains of people that had died en masse. Right? They had tried to bury some of them. They buried quite a few of the Huron-Wendat. It's a sad situation, but our people were saved by moving away. So there is some of that. We could be taught in the modern context by that, right? So that's some of the pandemic situations that we have met in the past. What they said, though, we were warned as young Nishnaabeg that they're going to come again. Those great sicknesses are going to come again. So what they're saying, what they said is that be careful. Try and deal with them as best you can. There are some herbs. I can't recall. What you have to do now is you have to build a lot of protection of your immune system. They cannot. How are you going to do that in the modern context? Is always a question. What you may not be able to lick this disease completely, but you may kind of do something with having it so severe. It may cause you to be ill, but not to kill you, as an example. So you have to be careful with what the lifestyle then becomes very, very much, very simple rules at times. Some of them would be like eat only fish, not so much red meats. There's a reason for it, why they say that. And one of them is fish don't cause inflammation to the body, while red meats cause some inflammation to the body. So you try and increase your chances of survival by not introducing inflammatory items to the system, to your own body, right? That kind of thing. That's the way our healers think, and it just, but it's done within the language, within the culture. But that's basically what they're trying to do, right? There are some plants you could take in the modern context. One of them is very much some of the tree fungal family. The modern chaga is a drink that it builds your immune system. It also protects you from such diseases as cancer, that kind of stuff. But it's anything that has the you can find that out through the web. Anything that has quinine, as an example, works very good in protection against viruses. And there's also, we're beginning to find out that it's working. But I have to be careful when I say that, because healers are still experimenting with how to deal with coronavirus, right? It hasn't hit our people and throughout the North as to the extent that it's really hard to experiment. By experiment, I mean, for Anishinaabe, it's a trial and error, right? You can also use the word experiment on it, right? But that's very much a white man word, I know. But if what I mean by that is that trial and error is hard to do if you cannot track individuals on a daily basis. That's what you got to do. Like, here is something, try it.
Yeah.
So, give you a couple of weeks. But usually herbs don't work for about 2 moons, right? Which is like 60 days. So by the time you catch up to that, what is working, what is not working, it takes time. time is something we don't have much of for some people. This virus hits, it acts quickly. For some, it doesn't act so quick. So it's you know, it's a game of, you know, dip and dive and dodging and sidestepping and trying to remember those things and trying to deal with them in that kind of with that kind of approach.
So what with Chioxuan, with the big sickness, our people Chioxuan, they were active. Like they took an active, they didn't just let it kind of wash over them. They physically distanced for 10 years, moved north in the territory. They did things to strengthen their immune system, like living really clean, eating lots of fish. They tried to work with their healers to figure out medicine. So it was similar to some of the things that our communities are doing today. What do you think? What do you think, kind of philosophically, that the land is trying to teach us right now?
That's a good question. Our people, it's really interesting that they've always said, ultimately, the bottom line is that the land will protect us, right? We're in the Nishnaabeg country. Same as the Cree is an example. They're in Cree country. I would think the same philosophy would exist with any of the nation, that they've been in that land for so long that there is something on that land that helps them survive, right? We have survived this area in Ontario for thousands of years. Stories say that we moved out. In other words, we were on migrations, epic migration. These are great migrations that necessitated that we move from the land at certain times because of big events, right? As an example, when the glaciers moved into Ontario, we had to move. Although we survived the cold pretty good, as witness of the way the Inuit survived the ice, as an example. If we move away temporarily, right? There are examples in the past, from the great past, years ago, where we moved away, but we always wanted to come back to our territory. We always have great respect for our territory. We always trust our territory. We trust that our territory will keep us healthy. Anything that our land provides us is medicine in a way for our bodies. It's good food. It's clean food. It's good food for us, and our bodies have adjusted over time for that food. We were put here, and we are of these things. Our bodies are historically made of this, of all those things in combination that you find here on this land. It's important that we go to the land. It's a land that has the basic philosophy of Nishnaabemowin says there is nothing can happen to us that you cannot find an antidote on our land. That we've got to remember that, right? We have to remember that and trust that it works. There is something here that'll protect us from coronavirus, but it's up to us. It's up to our healers to search that out, wait it out, go seek it out, and there it is there, and they know it's there. right? So they're probably working on it today as we speak, right? I know I asked a lot of some of the healers about it. You know, I'll ask something like Anisha Pedagogia Pchioxuin, Anisha Stigan Nogum. So I'm asking them what's happening, like what do you think? But it's perplexing, right? It's in some instances they look at it as a game of chess, to use a modern explanation, just so they understand that some of this is, like a virus is like it'll protect itself. It has a mechanism to protect. That's why viruses are there, is, because they're survivors themselves. And it's a spirit. It's a spirit that's bad spirit towards humans.
Yeah. But
sometimes you have to think viruses are good for something somewhere. Like, I know that they always said that the wetlands are very, very important. Right? They said, but that's also sometimes the home of sicknesses. So what they're saying is that they say the Great Amazon down in South America would probably house some viruses that are going to spring out of there someday and come out and be interested in doing something with humans. What is it in humans that does this? I don't know. It's hard for me to give some answers because I'm just human myself, right? I'd like to be able to say, this is the answer, but some of this is not definite stuff.
Yeah.
This is beginning to try and understand, the complexity of these things, right? And it's the same thing with our healers. They have to, in their own way, find, what's happening here. How come this virus has arrived? What is it about? It's a spirit, so you got to deal with it in the spiritual way too. And it's you gotta depend on these tools that have been given us through time by our ancestors living on this land, and we have forgotten some of this stuff. Unfortunately, we have forgotten some of this stuff where, because of colonization, because of our susceptibility to the European way of dominance, we have forgotten, unfortunately, a lot of our healing ways. But it's up to our healers to kind of try and remember as much as possible. There are healers left out there, which is so lucky for us that there is. But we have to believe that we can see our way through this great sickness. It's not a good time, but you can see now how difficult to figure these things out, these complex viruses. And it's nothing to fool with.
Yeah.
And it's nothing to play politics with. That's what I hear is unfortunate.
I like when you said like we have to trust the land. We have to trust that there's an antidote. And it makes me feel like the impetus for me to have a close relationship to the land, to be like putting my tobacco down, to be smudging, to be strengthening all of that is really important right now, and supporting those healers and supporting the elders because they're the ones that have the skills and the knowledge to be able to do this really, really important work in terms of figuring out our way through this. And it, I know that with younger Anishinaabe people and younger Indigenous people right now, particularly the ones that are in the city, there's this concern that we can't go to big ceremonies right now. We can't go to the powwow trail. We can't have sweats. We can't do sun dances. Some of those bigger ceremonies are being canceled right now, and or sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're going ahead, even though there are restrictions in place. And I remember you talking one time about Madden and Macons, and how they didn't perform ceremony. They didn't have these big sort of gatherings where there was a sunrise ceremony, but rather they did things in a very personal, very almost private, very, very full of humility sort of way as a daily practice. And that is something that I've been thinking about, because those are all things that we can still do, even though we can't have these big gatherings. So what do you say to people that are worried that we can't live up to our responsibilities to the land right now because of all of the restrictions in place?
I can understand. I get it. I do. It's always beautiful to celebrate who we are, and in big community groups and internation groups. These have so much spiritual meaning. Spirits who oversee it love this kind of situation. But but unfortunately, again, we're in a situation that we don't fully understand. We don't know what we're dealing with here, but we know how to social distance. That's from our past.
Yeah.
That's the way our people have dealt with these things. So we have to understand that the fight is on currently. We're in the middle of this. This is something that we cannot take lightly, because we've been warned. Like I said, we've been warned that this can happen again, and great sicknesses will have befell our people. So, right, it's the missionaries biblically even had this as their own story, but we also have it as our story. So it's almost like a global, international concern. Right? We have suffered because of it. Imagine going to tell a Huron-Wendat person, you're sick, but you're gonna have to go and powwow with a whole bunch of people. And they eventually had died off in en masse. I have to think back that, have we learned? Have we learned from past experiences? Surely they have.
Do you think that this is happening now because we live in such an unsustainable way, an unbalanced way, so much consumerism, so much capitalism that's damaging the earth and that's damaging our relationship to the earth? Do you think the pandemic is the land's response to this?
Well, these spirits, if you want to call them that, come from the land, right? Now, how come these things happen is what you're asking me. How come they happen to humanity?
Mm-hmm.
And our people have always said, if this kind of thing arises again, look at yourself. What are you doing bad here? How come you're being punished? And you'd have to say that they always said, you always have to think, what are you harming? What are you doing harm to? How come that they're reacting like this? Right? So really, if you use that theory, if you want to call it that, what it's saying basically is that we're doing something to the land because these spirits come from the land. And as much as we love our land and so on, somewhere they came from somewhere and are working against us because they see we're the problem. Right? What are we doing? What are we doing? Now, you could see there are some things here that I know that that I can see initially myself. Like when I look at people, when I see how communities are living, that there are just some things that we're doing that really work against the earth. We know that. There's some things that are obvious, but we don't want to change. We don't want to change. If we're going to continue to burn fuel, that is fuel meaning like gasoline, etc., like carbon, it's going to do harm. It's going to release other spirits from the earth. I don't know how that works. In like I'm a thinker about these things, and I try and take from what I've been taught by the old ones to think these things out. But it's like if you do harm to one thing, it's going to release something else over here, and it's going to work against you, right? I don't know how that carbon thing works, but we know that our people have always were wondering, with all the smoke that's going up in the air, what's it doing? It's not sent up there for prayer.
Yeah.
It's sent up there because somebody wants to move from one area to another as fast as they can. Right? Why? Why do we need to fly all over this world? I remember an old man's. I went up to him. I was one of the elders. He's now passed. He's old. And I went up to him and I was going to talk to him about something. And I said, "Oh, Charlie," I said, "there's a big crash today. And just, all the people died." And he thinks and he says to me, "What are they doing up there anyway?" I kind of thought, gee, that's a flippant answer. But really, when you think about it, why are we having to jump on planes and go around the world far, far, far away, as fast as we can, burning fuel? And that's just, it's just that we take it so normally, but yet we're doing damage. That lifestyle, like you say, you know, like the question you raised, if, you know, is our materialism, as an example, adding to this? Well, yeah, duh, you know. We have to kind of hold back a little bit. We have to hold back. That's based on my association with older people.
Yeah.
Some of them would not do that. In other words, you would not find a Nishnaabeg to be the first one on the moon. It just didn't happen. And I don't think there's a Nishnaabeg gone there yet, right? Because our basic philosophy is that be happy where you are. You be happy around your land. You know, why do you want to do certain things? Question materialism. Question greed. Right? They always said question greed. Like don't desire things that you don't need. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether that answers your question, but
well, that's good. That's good. That's a good answer.
yeah.
In the north, some of the Dene chiefs have encouraged their people to go out on the land and get away from the bigger cities and just live off the land in canvas tents or in cabins. And I know this too is like an Anishinaabe practice to retreat to the bush, but it's hard for Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg to do that right now because, especially right now in July and August, it seems like all of Toronto is here at their cottages with their jet skis and their boats, and it's hard to even get on the water right now. So, what are your thoughts on that? You know, we've had the big settlement. I know that you've spent a lot of your life fighting for our land and fighting so that our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will still have access to land. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just retreat to the land right now?
Yes, I agree. But our area has been taken over by the urban cottager who has 3 houses.
Yeah.
They have a house in Toronto. They have a house on our shoreline at Lakes, it's cottage, and they have a house on their condo in Florida. Right? That's the pattern you see. It's a pattern of lifestyle that I don't understand. I remember this as a younger man. I was already older, you know, living in a tent for the summer on Buckhorn Lake. And there was a sickness going on, a virus, a flu. And we were saying, oh, we're not going home just as yet. There's a lot of, we heard the other day from somebody we met at the bay fishing that they're still sick in Curve Lake. Right? So that principle of staying away was working there for us. But for Michi Saagiig today, because our land has been taken over by the cottagers, these shorelines that used to be our home, we're shoreline people, right? And we that whole way of dealing with sickness by staying away from the village Remember, we were forced to live in villages. That was not our style in the old days. Only certain times a year we get together. And sometimes, apparently, we didn't get together because there's too much sickness. So that we're still dealing with it by isolation. Right? So I really like what the elders are telling the young ones up in Dene country, that to go out on the land.
Yeah.
Because it's a isolation process. It's also will force people to eat good.
Another
thing. Remember, I was saying about the importance of eating like fish, as an example.
Yeah.
Summertime is also a good time to look for plants that are healing.
Yeah.
Now is the time to discover what gives you the chemical quinine, as an example.
Yeah.
You know, what plants, like there's enough on the web now to tell you what is, whether or not you can find that on Dene land. I don't know. That's not my territory. I can tell you where it comes from here by looking at the web. Actually, what I do, I don't go into I'm too old to go into the bush anymore. My knee is bad. So I just go to a certain herb store in Peterborough and say, hey, what do you got for this? And that old man that works in there, I know he knows it comes from the land and to build up an immune system. And that's really what I do myself right now.
Yeah.
Knowing, build your immune system.
Yeah.
Because this is, if they don't find a vaccine for this or any kind of antidote, we're going to get it.
Yeah.
You and I are going to get it. Or everyone.
Yeah.
And is going to get it.
So over the last 20 years, you and I have spent a lot of time together on the land. I think that's the main way that you've taught me about Nishnaabemowin. And we've done a lot of land-based education together at Trent. And we've talked a lot about how we want those PhD students at Trent to understand the bigger philosophical, ethical components of the knowledge system and not just have like a tourist kind of approach to ricing or to sugar bushing. And now we're in the situation where a lot of our teaching is being moved online. And that's, for a lot of Indigenous knowledge holders, is a concern because our knowledge systems are so much about the land, so much about having a relationship to the land, the relationship between elders and learners. You can't put your tobacco down on Zoom. You can't smudge on Zoom. So what are some of the issues that you are thinking through at Trent with the PhD program and with your land-based courses? I know at the Sugar Bush, we had to really kind of pull back in March and just have family groups boiling. It wasn't, there wasn't as many people in the Sugar Shack this year. It was a different way of doing it. And in some ways, I feel like my family, because it was just the four of us, we really had to work together for the whole day. And there was lots of good teachings and lots of good learnings that came out of that. But I know it's very difficult right now for Indigenous students at universities who rely on kind of land-based courses to provide them with a little bit of Anishinaabe education.
Well, yeah, that's the most current question about, how do we, as an institution of teaching, typically that, we've done it face to face, especially with land-based knowledge. How do you now do it in a virtual, non-face-to-face situation? that technology or way of, or pedagogy or whatever you want to call it is now very much in everybody's mind. Everybody's doing the, different techniques to be able to make it happen. Trent University, as an example, have said there's cannot be any face-to-face teaching unless now there's a special exemption. So what I have done is I approached the director of the program to ask the dean for an exemption for me because of land-based knowledge, because I really believe the way to learn Nishnaabem ways or Nishnaabemowin is through the use of land-based techniques on site. Very important to me that the whole thing is a teaching tool of itself that you cannot lecture on, you cannot, it just has to be a hands-on situation, you know. We've robbed our young people of that for a long time. We cannot continue to do it. We have to give them the tools, right, of land-based learning. That's the way we do it. That's the way we've developed our knowledge transference from one generation to the next. So it's important, I believe in it. Now, we face a situation now that we so have to be careful. Because if we do the face-to-face teaching, then we're at risk of transferring this virus to each other. And yet the cost for this is enormous. The knowledge that is now being passed over in order for us to just only survive physically is that it's a lot that so schools are going to face this generally, even in the general population. This is going to be a big dilemma. Socialization of kids will suffer greatly. Well, I've been thinking about that. So anyway, personally, I got an exemption, except that the dean wants me to hold off for 14 days till the students, when they first arrive here, would be socially isolate themselves before we then go out on the land. Yeah. But the problem, and I'm going about this in a different way again, I'm going to ask that 2-week period be an exemption. Also because that's when the wild rice is ready. As soon as they get here, the wild rice is ready. Yeah. So if I leave it for 2 weeks, it's gone. Yeah. Right? And that breaks the basic Nishnabemowin thing, is that when your harvest is ready, you better be there. Yeah. Or you'll be left behind, and you'll have a hard winter if you don't store that food. So that's what we're up against. Now, if I don't get that exemption, there is the modern tool of camera work that we're so lucky. Like when I was a young man, we didn't have cameras, we didn't have film. We didn't, I had to pick this all up by being there. Yeah. Being on site, being the young kid that left the other kids in order to be with the old ones. I mean, I was so lucky to do that. I probably was an odd kid. I don't know. But it wasn't happening with the others as much, because there's only certain families and certain groups that were being out on the land yet. It was on the way out. And today I don't I don't do it with my kids. Right? That's how much I've lost personally. It's just that although I taught my kids a lot, and hands-on stuff and all that kind of thing, they know. Right now, one of them is making medicine, as an example. Right? Using a lot of bear fat as a base. But anyway, that's another story. But when getting back to the camera work that is available to us now, we have all kinds of technology now. With phones, iPhones even can take photographs of people living on the land, hands-on learning. So it can be demonstrated, and it can be shown, and it's almost like we can be there. And I have taken videos of our activities of maple sugar bushing and ricing as an example that I have ready to show to the new students as they arrive, if I cannot get them back, if I can't get them out on the land.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of camera work. Now, some elders don't like the idea of camera work.
Yeah.
I know one of my elders who's still alive doesn't like camera. Yeah. Doesn't like that kind of thing, because he said, when we're teaching, knowledge is a spiritual activity. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what he believes. And he said that spirits are scared by camera. No, there is some reluctance, right, to be able to do, for me, certain ceremonial things, as an example, that I don't think there should be cameras around. But for hands-on learning, like maple sugar bushwork or ricing, there can be. That's my understanding. And I think that's okay. But you got to put tobacco down that you're doing that. Ask the spirits for your understanding of what you're trying to do is transfer the knowledge of that activity to the children. So it's important to do a bit of a ceremony at that time, right? So any chance you have to speak to spirit or pray, then you put tobacco down and you mention that. Yeah. That's important to me. That you got to remember that we're guided by spirits at all times. And it's up to us to make sure that we acknowledge that that relationship. It's important. But we can work with camera, and we can work with Zoom as a way of transferring some of this knowledge. I think it can be done. Not ideal. Yeah. Not ideal. The sooner you can get back to the land, the better. But with the lack of doing that, some of this technology that's available to us is pretty good. It's cheap. Not like the old days where a camera is going to cost you $2,000. You can't afford it, right? Yeah. And we don't have the money. But now it's there. It's all over.
So it can't be a replacement for ricing or the sugar bush, but you can use it in kind of extreme situations like this to learn a little bit about those processes until you can get back onto the land.
And one of the things I'm doing is that I cannot, if they give me tobacco to have a sweat lodge, as an example, I'm saying no at this point in time until I think this out. I mean, I could have sweat lodges on my own, or maybe even just choose one other individuals to have them with.
Yeah.
You just do it on a 2x2 situation. but I cannot, somebody else has to be able to do these sweat lodges along beside me. I can only do it for one sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not, personally, I'm not well, so I can't do sweat lodges at this time in my life, my own life. So I'm not, if I was healthy, I would only pick somebody to do it with. But I couldn't do it for others,
Right.
for other people.
Right.
At this time, I'm going to have to do more thinking about ceremony. Same, I had a pipe ceremony on summer solstice, and we, instead of smoking, we touched the pipe. When I smoked it for everyone.
Yeah.
So they didn't smoke. We didn't smoke it and pass it around at that time because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Now there are some elders who say, well, the activity of smoking a pipe supersedes any danger that would be around because of protection of those spirits that protect that pipe. Not sure. You'd have to ask those elders about that. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure those spirits want to teach us that kind of thing. I think we recognize there are bad spirits. There are viruses that are working against us at times.
Yeah.
And we better be ready to deal with them if it even means that we stay away from our sacred objects for a minute.
Yeah.
You know.
Do you think it's important for, say, someone like me, like my family could come up and do a sweat because we're all in a bubble? Is that important to do for the community and important to do spiritually at this time?
It's always important to be able to have sweats and to have that kind of ceremony and pipes, right? You got to keep them going. You're lucky as a family that you have you that can, teach you how to do sweats and all that. Not all families are like that.
That's right.
And they want to depend on you as an example, would come and ask you to do sweats for them. But you have to be careful. You have to be so careful. I don't know how to answer that because this virus right now is so shifty. Mm-hmm. Like it pretends to kind of gives you the idea of everything's okay because this family hasn't had any. It all tests negative.
Yeah. When
in fact maybe they don't.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful because this spirit is tricky. That's why it's doing so well around the world, because of its trickiness. This so-called scientists and great healers have not been able to fix this. Have not been able to figure this out. That's why I said this is a complicated virus. Yeah. That's why I'm talking to a lot of healers myself. If I had a neat little answer for you, I would give it to you. I would, but I don't. So be careful. If you hold ceremony for the sake of ceremony, and it's sacred, 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 be careful because this virus is so tricky and complex that it can trick you. Be careful. No matter who you are.
Yeah.
Like I have to be careful, and I think sometimes I'm so good. That's a joke. But it's like you can get into that mindset.
Yeah.
So be careful is all I'm saying.
Yeah. All right. Do you have anything else that you want to share in this interview? Anything else that you want to say about land-based education or the pandemic?
I would suggest that, you know, people have an ongoing talk about these things.
Mm.
And maybe you and I, maybe in a couple of months, have another chat like this.
Yeah.
Just to see where things are going, because it's an ongoing
Right.
situation. It's
Yeah.
you know, we're on a very current attack
Yeah.
by a great sickness that's global. So we have to be on top of it as much as possible. You know, what have you learned? What have I learned? What have other people learned? And we'll learn from each other. And I think that's, you know, and don't be so naive as to kind of think that you have the answer.
Right.
No one has the answer at this stage.
Yeah.
Right? So be careful.